boa noite aos internautas que nos acompanham neste programa Nanotecnologia do Avesso. Hoje, no seu número 427, fazemos este programa dedicado ao público não especialista, porque é este público que paga as pesquisas sobre nanotecnologia realizadas no Brasil. Também fazemos este programa porque é aqui que nós podemos discutir os impactos da nanotecnologia na sociedade, no meio ambiente, na economia, na saúde, na ética, coisa que não é discutida aonde se faz nanotecnologia no Brasil. Por fim, fazemos este programa porque acreditamos que ser livre é ser bem informado e a divulgação científica contribui, colabora para o aprofundamento da democracia e da cidadania no Brasil. Hoje, conforme tínhamos anunciado, estamos conectados com o professor Jameson Wetmore, diretamente dos Estados Unidos, e que vai nos falar hoje sobre desenvolvimento da nanotecnologia e equidade e igualdade, tema de muita importância para nós. Vou passar a palavra para ele, ele vai se apresentar e depois começaremos a conferência dele. Ok, Professor Wetmore, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jamie Wetmore. I am a professor at Arizona State University at the School for the Future of Innovation in Society. And I've been working on nano for, I think, over 10 years now, actually. A little over 10 years ago, our university was awarded a Center for Nanotechnology in Society. And so I worked on that project for 10 years. And then recently, about 2 years ago, the National Nanotechnology Coordinated Infrastructure was set up in the United States, and I had the societal and ethical implications work for that organization.
Okay, I will put the screen your presentation.
Okay.
The first slide.
Great. I can't see anything, so I'm just going to assume that it's there, right?
Yes, you will not see this. You have to control in your computer.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the second slide.
The second slide?
Very good, yep.
Okay.
So
I will put in the screen. A moment.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, so this slide doesn't really mean anything. It just sort of conveys the idea that, especially in the early 2000s in the United States, nanotechnology was touted as having great promise at solving all different types of problems. And if you go to the next slide.
Okay.
One of the arguments early on was that nanotechnology would not only help industrialize countries, but actually help address some of the most critical development problems as well. And sort of the famous article for this was published in 2005 by Salamanca Buntello and his colleagues. If you go to the next slide, you can see the 10 different applications that they outlined in that article. Basic human needs that are required all around the world, everything from energy and agriculture to making sure there's clean water, drugs delivered, deal with disease, even deal with pest controls. And the hope was that nanotechnology would be able to make a positive contribution to all of these problems.
Okay,
if you go to the
5.
Next slide, yeah, 5. So some colleagues of mine, and some that you all may know as well, Noella Invernizzi and Guillermo Folladori, they actually wrote an article just months after that first one came out because they were a lot more skeptical. They didn't necessarily see that all of nanotechnology was going to lead magically to a better world for everyone. And they warned the industry that perhaps nanotechnology, that the existing political forces and social forces would not allow this to happen. Or simply noting the fact that it doesn't automatically happen, that you actually have to have a social push, a political push, so that technology does benefit a disadvantaged group.
Do you believe that we had some hype about nanotechnology?
I think we had a lot of hype about nanotechnology, actually, yeah. You know, there was talks about revolutions and changing the world, and I think in the end, looking back now, nanotechnology in the last 10, 15 years has done a lot of good, but it hasn't been the magical game changer that many people argued it would be.
And maybe he can tell that it was so much promise.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. In the United States, the promise was really focused on the change in the United States, but there were a handful of people that said that it would help around the world. So yeah, no, there was a lot of promise. I was recently at a meeting full of high-level nanotechnology scientists and engineers, and they were shown the image of the promise that was made 15 years ago, and they were asked what happened. And one of them responded, well, that's what we just do to get money. Now that we're working, we're getting good stuff done, but that was just fantasy.
And so, you think the new pop star is graphene?
Graphene?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we've come a long way in graphene. And I think it is going to have a lot of industrial applications, it already does. The question is, who will benefit most from it? It doesn't look like it's going to, it looks right now like it's going to be a subtle change from existing situations, but not necessarily a radical departure from what we knew before.
Okay, you can continue. 6.
Okay, we'll go to 6. So, as part of the Center for Nanotechnology and Society, we actually put together a team of scholars to study this, to see whether or not nanotechnology would have a positive impact on developing areas around the world. And you can see we have a pretty diverse team there. At one point, we were all at Arizona State University and Georgia Tech, but actually our team has done quite well going to universities in like 4 countries and 3 continents. And if you go to the next slide.
And the cooperation between many universities was so good?
Yeah, so what sort of happened is, like I said, we were all at 2 universities initially, but we've branched that project out and now can coordinate it basically around the world. We have colleagues in Chile, colleagues in South Africa, colleagues in Canada, and we're actually continuing to do work on a handful of projects in this area, which I'll actually get to a bit later.
And it is only between universities. There is no NGOs.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, in our work, we interview NGOs and we learn from them, but we haven't had them directly involved in the research itself.
Okay, you can continue. 7.
Okay, number 7. And basically, the question was, you know, will nanotechnology make the rich richer, and will it make the poor poorer? And unfortunately, in a lot of the studies we've done, especially my colleague Susan Cousins, it does look like most new technologies do that. They do make the rich richer and the poor poorer, regardless of the promises made when they start. So we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah. 8.
Initially, we had chosen 4 countries that we were going to look at. And in fact, looking back at my notes, Brazil was one of those countries, and we were very excited to do part of the project there. Unfortunately, our funding meant we could only do 2 countries, and we ended up doing South Africa and the United States. And we chose South Africa because when they launched their government-sponsored nanotechnology program, it explicitly said that the program was designed to help disadvantaged people, that they wanted nanotechnology to benefit not just the rich, but also the poor. And so we wanted to study a country trying to do that to see whether they were able to succeed or not. And unfortunately, and then we compared with the United States, where there wasn't any official mandate to do work that would benefit developing areas, but you know, that some scholars eventually did. What we found in South Africa is that there was some work focused in that area. One of the most famous ones was to create they called it a teabag water filter, but it used some nanotechnology to filter water quickly and easily. And unfortunately, I think that has never gone to production. They had the factory ready to go, and it was all up and looking to go, and they had prototypes, but I've never actually seen evidence that they have begun to produce. And that's sort of the case with a lot of these, is there's a lot of talk at the beginning and a lot of hope, and then they trail off, unfortunately. In the United States, there wasn't a lot of focus on addressing developing world issues with nanotechnology. There was some. One sort of really revealing conversation I had with a scientist at Stanford, he argued, he actually did work in the developing world, but also work in nanotechnology, but he didn't see how or why those two would come together. That actually most of the problems were such that the technology you needed could be reasonably simple. So let's go to the next slide.
Okay, 9.
Yep. So what we found was, yep, there were attempts to address those 10 big problems that I mentioned earlier, but they were largely addressing those problems in the developed world. And so they were not as focused on the techniques and ways to integrate into the global south. And as a result, there wasn't a huge amount of payoff. So you can see the top right image there is the teabag nano water filter that never quite got produced. The bottom one is sort of a more American technology. This is the a nano enhanced with carbon nanotubes golf club. So again, a technology that might help a handful of people, but it's not going to make a major change in the world as we know it. So next slide.
Okay, is 10.
So by and large, this was a reasonably depressing research project. It was, you know, we were hoping to find some evidence that change could happen, and there was some, but not nearly as much as we were hoping for. And it was sad to see the billions of dollars being spent on nanotechnology, and the idea that it would only benefit a handful and not more broad array of people.
Is this from United States or South Africa?
So South Africa, I'm trying to think what their budget was. Their budget was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The U.S. budget right now in nanotechnology is about 1.5 billion a year.
Yeah.
So we're talking a fair amount of money.
Yeah.
And you know, the biggest equity thing that we were able to track down in South Africa was that South African labs funded by nano money were attracting scholars from around the continent of Africa. And so doing a really impressive job of training the next generation of African scientists. And many of these students would then go back to their home countries and set up labs at their own universities. And so that was really sort of the best outcome we could see as far as equity goes in South Africa.
Okay.
So,
it's 11.
Yeah, so we decided we wanted to not just critique and point out the problems, but perhaps make an attempt to deal with some of the problems that we were seeing, to help increase the chances that the promise that nanotechnology could benefit around the world would actually happen. And we sort of put together two things to promote this. So the first thing is this Nano Around the World card game, which actually I should have put the URL on there. You can download the game and print it out and play it wherever you are. But the basic idea of that game is to every person in the game, is usually played by about 20 people, plays a character, somebody from around the world. And it's not just Americans or Europeans. I think there's one American and maybe one European, 2 Europeans in the game, because those countries only make up about 15% of the world's population. So as a result, I think there's 3 characters from South America and 10 characters from Asia, with a diversity of incomes, diversity of problems, diversity of jobs. And the idea then is to have the people play the game and try to collect nanotechnology cards that would benefit them. Now, the sort of trick in the game is that the nanotechnology cards represent the nanotechnologies that are out there and that are currently being promised. And by and large, those are designed to help the most wealthy and not the least wealthy. And so one of the real points of the game that the players come to understand as they play it is that nanotechnology isn't being designed to help them. And we challenge the players at the end of the game to think about, well, what sort of nanotechnology enhanced technologies could actually benefit their character, get them to think about a wider array of people when they think about nanotechnology. And so we've actually played this with everybody from 12-year-old kids to primary investigator scientists and engineers at universities to try to help them think about a broader array of people than they normally think about when they do their work. Next slide.
Yes.
The other thing that we developed along this line was a series of community engagement workshops. And this was sort of inspired by our South Africa experience. We sort of found that there were a number of scholars that did want to work with local communities to develop technologies that would help them, but actually didn't have pathways to do it, didn't have the skills to do it, weren't sure where to start. And so we developed, this basically ended up being about a 20-hour workshop that you could run over anywhere from 2 to 5 days. Next slide.
Yes.
And it does not train somebody to all they need to know to work with the community, but gives them some basic ideas of where to start. And so we have 3 basic lessons in that series of workshops. And the first one is that you can't just focus on technology. You have to think about how the technology fits into broader technical and social systems. You've got to understand the community context. So you actually need to know something about the people that you're working with, but also the unique situation that they live in. And finally, many technology development programs fail because the local communities don't take charge of them after the outsiders leave. And so you actually have to empower and build capabilities within the communities, making sure that they're excited and interested in continuing the project after the initial instigator might leave. Next slide.
Yes.
And so there's sort of 2 takeaways from these workshops is really, if you're going to do work in other countries or even developing areas of your own country, you really need to be a student of the local culture. You need to embed yourself. You need to understand local issues, local people, before you're ever going to be able to develop a new solution to solve a problem. And then finally, most of the people who are involved in cutting-edge technology research are never going to be able to gain enough skills to be able to do that by themselves. And so we found that working with local NGOs and others who live in a certain area, they have the ability to do that translation and build those bridges that are absolutely necessary if you're going to actually create something that's going to help a local community. And that's all the prepared remarks that I have right now, and I'm happy to answer questions or continue the conversation.
I have I would like to have one debate with you, because you are in the United States and in this commission, National Commission for Infrastructure for social implication, social and ethical implication, no?
Societal and ethical implications, I think is what it's called, yeah.
Yeah, because every year we have here our international seminar in nanotechnology, society and environment.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2009, I believe, we invite Mr. Mikhail Rocco. You know who is Mr. Rocco?
I do know Mr. Rocco, yes.
Yes. And he was in our seminar. He made the open conference.
Wow, great.
Yes, and I was in the table to make the debate with him.
Uh-huh.
And I asked him about the budget of the National Nanotechnology Initiative. And I asked if the budget, what part in percentual will be for the military industry.
Okay.
And he answered me that was between 25 and 32%.
Okay.
And but he put clear that all that is made with money from National Nanotechnology Initiative is public. So this part of the money that made research for military industry was public, or are public. So if you take 25%, 1.6 billion or 1.8 billion,
yep,
will be for million or 400 million or 450 million.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so large money for this. Is many times more than the Brazilian budget for nanotechnology. And my question for you is possible to think about the equity and equality with nanotechnology if you have this kind of budget for military industry?
Yeah, I think I am agreeing with what you're insinuating. I think, you know, the budget that we have to study equity and equality is, you know, a tiny little % of that overall budget, and even still a tiny little % of the military budget within it. And I think that's partially, you know, that Nano Around the World game that we played. One of the purposes of that was to show the variety of military technologies that are being developed that are unlikely to benefit the most disadvantaged. And so that's one of the issues that we really did try to point out with that. Yeah, it's interesting to think about the money. So the project that I'm part of gets $17 million a year, and that's spread to, I think, 23 different universities. Of that, I get, well, I run a few programs that use about $150,000 worth of that. So probably right now what we're spending on studying the social aspects of nanotechnology is probably under $200,000 a year or $300,000 a year out of $1.5 billion. So for a while, Mike Rocco made sure that the Centers for Nanotechnology and Society got funding. And that did happen for 10 years. But at some point, I think people got bored of it. And there wasn't necessarily the fears being raised by nanotechnology. I think one of the reasons why the US government funded nanotechnology, the social aspects of nanotechnology, is that they wanted some insurance in case something wrong happened. And the public started to get upset. At this point in time, the American public doesn't seem largely concerned about nanotechnology. There aren't horror stories being told. There isn't protests against nanotechnology right now. And so there really isn't right now the funding to study the social aspects, I think largely because of that.
Yeah, I can tell you something about the Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Here, there is not that the development of nanotechnology contribute to decrease the inequality in Brazilian society.
Say that one more time.
There is nothing that the development of Brazilian nanotechnology development the development of nanotechnology in Brazil never contribute to cut the Brazilian inequality.
Right.
So
yep.
The Brazil continues to be a large country and with large inequality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not nanotechnology, but in general, the development of science and technology in Brazil don't contribute to cut the inequality here in Brazil.
And I think
you think about that, what contribute with the poor people was only to increase the minimum salary more than the inflation.
Yeah.
This was the contribution. Science and technology doesn't contribute in our case.
So I actually think it's the same experience in the United States as well. I think it may not be quite as visible, but it is still definitely the case in the US. And it's interesting, one of the goals of the project has been to answer the claim that science and technology benefit everyone. I have a little saying that I've never seen a technology that didn't make somebody's life worse. And in some cases, the technology are clearly designed to help a specific group of people, and even if they're not designed to make another group's life worse, they get left behind farther and farther. And the way that we in this project have tried to address that is to make scientists and engineers aware that many of their actions do lead to greater inequalities. And a number of scientists got into the profession because they wanted to make the world a better place, and helping them see the ways in which their actions could make things worse does help them to reflect on things and perhaps change some of their actions and perhaps get involved in some of these programs that are designed to help the disenfranchised.
I think there are many scientists. I know here in Brazil, but I think it's similar in the United States. Many scientists that believe that they work for the humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, he works in his laboratory, and the product, the end of the research will be for the humanity.
And I think that's the sort of myth that is told, that all new science and all new technology automatically makes the world a better place. And it's interesting. I do a lot of work with graduate students, because if you were to work with a professor of 15 years and get them to believe that, they actually sometimes can have a nervous breakdown when they realize that the last 15 years of their life they've been doing projects that were not compatible with their values. When I work with graduate students, they haven't invested the time and money and career yet, and they sometimes have the ability to change their course, find ways to ensure that their work does better things, or some of them, because they're so focused on trying to make the world a better place, believe that actually becoming a lawyer or working in government may have a greater chance of doing that than being a scientist, and some of them change careers as a result.
I think another difference between the United States and Brazil, apart the amount of money that is so different, is impossible to compare, is that here in Brazil, the research are made by public money. The companies don't put money to make research, only public money. So the development of nanotechnology here in Brazil was by public money, and we have make research about this where the public money was to produce what kind of knowledge. And here in Brazil, 9.9%, 99% is for new knowledge about new product or new process. Only 1% is for impacts.
Yep.
So there are one appropriation of the public money that is very, very irresponsible. This is my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the United States is different because the research is not made only with public money. Maybe for the impacts. I don't know exactly, but maybe to produce new knowledge of the impacts was with only public money. But companies in the United States also put some money to produce new knowledge in nanotechnology.
Yeah, so usually in the US, and I don't know the exact breakdown for nanotechnology, but for every dollar that the government spends, corporations spend $2 on research and development. Now, partially that is government subsidized because they get huge tax breaks if they do research. But you're right, it is definitely being done at the company's level, and they're actively looking for applications and ways to get the nanotechnology out into the world. The downside there, however, can be that they're often looking in the best interest of their shareholders and not necessarily a diverse audience, or especially not necessarily looking at countries beyond the United States as possibly benefiting from their work.
Okay.
But let me just say one other quick thing. What sounds like Brazil doesn't do, which also the US doesn't do, but other countries do, is focus on design. So there's some countries that, instead of spending lots of money on research and development, take the research and development done by other countries and then fund design work to actually make sure that that is useful and applicable to specific circumstances. And that's how they do their sort of innovation budget.
What countries?
So I think that South Korea has done some of this, and shoot, what's that country? India has done some of this as well.
Yes, because here our contact with India is very, very difficult. We doesn't have the natural or normally contact with the Indian. But I would like to know if you produce some materials for education to the public that is not a specialist in nanotechnology.
Yeah, so the Nano Around the World game that I mentioned to you earlier, that's been played.
But this is not comics.
Not comics?
Yes. Because here in Brazil, we are working for public, not specialists in nanotechnology, with comics.
With comic books. Yeah, we haven't done that. I do a lot of work with science museums, and we developed a few different nano programs to help the general public understand the role of nanotechnology in society. We actually have a whole brochure, or a whole report on how to help the public think about their role in the future of nanotechnology.
Is TV program?
It's not a TV program, although actually I can't.
TV program by internet or not?
There is a nanotechnology TV program that I was a part of that I can send you the link on if you're interested. That was called the.
After you can send me the address to see this program.
I will send you the TV program, and I will send you the
web address.
The game. Yep. I can send you both of those.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I'll send you also, one of the major projects I've been a part of was called the Nanoscale Informal Science Education Network. And that group put together educational programs in nanotechnology for everybody from age 5 to 95. The idea was to reach a very, very broad audience with that. And I can send you their major website as well. The nice thing about that is that there are lots and lots of interactive activities that you can download from online and then do with all different sorts of age groups.
And you believe that in United States the nanotechnology open many jobs?
So it's really hard to tell. There are certainly people who say now that they work in nanotechnology. When the whole thing first started, there were lots of people like chemists who said, well, what you're calling nanotechnology, we've always done. Chemistry is just nanotechnology that actually works. And there are some degree programs. So actually here at Arizona State University, we have a master's degree in nanoscience. So it's clear that there are certainly jobs that are in and around nanotechnology, but because the word is so broad, because it can mean everything from cleaning water to producing energy to creating materials, it's really hard to parse out specifically what exists because of this push for nano that wouldn't otherwise exist.
Yeah, because I remember that Mr. Rocco was right about this kind of the jobs and the preview 2 million jobs.
2 million jobs is what he said.
Yeah.
It's conceivable that there are 2 million people working in nano industries. It'd be interesting to know, would they just be doing another job if it wasn't for nano? And my guess is most of them would be, but
yes,
yeah.
I think we doesn't have research about this. How much jobs nanotechnology open in the market in United States or Europe. Here in Brazil was only in the university.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It is a very, very small quantity. Because our universities, public universities, are in crisis many times.
Yeah.
It's impossible to open place for people that made the PhD, etc., to become a professor. So it's a very few people that was integrated in the university in the nanotechnology area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the startups. What do you think about the startups in nanotechnology in the United States?
Can you say it again? I didn't quite catch that.
What?
I didn't catch what you just said. What was it, the question?
It's about the startups in nanotechnology.
Easter taps.
Yeah. These small companies that beginnings in the university with the subject.
Got it.
Something about the how to practice, how to build some products with nanotechnology.
Yeah, so there certainly have been a few. In the United States, if you are an engineering professor, your ultimate goal is to create a startup. And 9 times out of 10, you spend a lot of time working on them and nothing ever happens. So it's a pretty rare case where a startup actually does something. We actually had a startup at ASU several years ago that actually did do well, and that was because they had created a new type of microscope, and it was actually useful to a broad array of people. But for the most part, I actually have had a chat with our the group at ASU who gets patents for our faculty members, and they will admit that they lose money every year, that they put more money into patents than they ever get back from them. But they argue. What's that?
I ask about this because here in Brazil now is very important for the universities.
Yeah.
To produce startups, because if it is not easy, is not possible to open a place to job, how the way that the university have to do this is with the programs to support the process of the startups.
Yeah, so in the United States, there's only 2 or 3 universities that actually make money off of patents, but everybody else thinks that they have to do it. And when I talk to our sort of the development people here at ASU, what they will tell you is, yes, we lose money, but we are trying to create that innovative and entrepreneurship spirit in our students, and that's why it's worth it. So at least in the US, most universities will admit there's not a monetary or job payoff in the end, but it is a good instruction for the students.
Yeah. So, but you think that the convergence of technology that in the base was or are the nanotechnology, the biotechnology, the technology of information, and the brain science or neuroscience is the future. So I think there's some unique circumstances that led to that being a goal of a lot of U.S. funding. There are a few people placed in the National Science Foundation who believe in transhumanism. And this is another very good question to discuss, huh? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that actually led to, I don't know that Mike Rocco has ever officially announced that he's a transhumanist. Yeah. But certainly some of his very close colleagues have clearly announced that they are transhumanists. And I think this push for convergence is sort of rooted in that. I do think it's clear that a lot of major new technologies in the last 100 years have been a result of taking different areas of research and combining them. So I don't doubt that. But I think it's going to be a more organic process by which we combine rather than forcing these different lines of research to converge. I think Mr. Rocco was transhumanist, but yeah. But I think he had a close writer. Okay. Bamberger. What is the name of the guy? I don't remember now, but it was a long time ago. Was also in the NNI. Yeah, the Bainbridge. Bainbridge, yeah. Mm-hmm. Is this? And he's very clearly announced that he is a transhumanist. So, and he still, I believe, still works at the National Science Foundation. Yeah. Also, a long time ago, I think it's 6-7 years, I organized here in São Paulo many 3-4 conference for Eric Drexler. Oh yeah. Yeah. And what do you think about the framework that Drexler made in many decades? Was it many decades? Was it? I guess maybe it was 3 decades now, wasn't it? Yeah. So I think it's very interesting
that people like Mike Rocco and others in the US took that fantastic vision and were able to get so much money out of the US government from it. And it was a very interesting process because they were selling this vision which promised amazing things, but also opened up possibilities of incredible danger. And were able to convince the public that the good things were going to happen and the bad things wouldn't happen. And then it got to the point where they had to admit, no, nanobots are decades, if not centuries away, so don't worry about any of that. So really the impetus for the major push for nanotechnology in the US was Drexler's work, and then they immediately abandoned him once they started getting the funding and focused on more mundane issues.
But my interpretation of the conference of Drexler was a message to the Brazilian people, especially for Brazilian scientists, that he was not more so marginal in the United States, because his proposal of the nanofabrication was many projects with the money from National Science Foundation or another public funds.
Yeah, there was, I think, it's interesting because I think he was instrumental in the promotion of nanotechnology in the United States. But then he carried a fair amount of baggage with him because his visions could invoke such fear that people did try to push him away. It's interesting, you would read Drexler if you were a nanoscientist, but you would say, but I'm not worried about that because we're just doing mundane things. So it was a way of announcing we're going to create a revolution, but then saying nothing's changing at the same time. And I think there are still some debates about Drexler's role, but I think he was instrumental, and yet his vision continues to be discussed, but he's sort of pushed off to the side and doesn't necessarily play an intimate role in, at least in the U.S., in the funding from the U.S. government. He may play a stronger role outside that sphere.
Yes, I think he doesn't have a power inside of the university, inside of the establishment. In the university and the government funds, foundations, so he was not so important for the people that was in the establishment that time.
But his Foresight Institute actually did some interesting things and did generate a fair amount of discussion. So he did find other ways to be part of the bigger discussion of nanotechnology.
Okay, we are in the end of our program. I would like to say to you, thank you very much for your contribution, and I hope we have another opportunity to discuss this that is very important, the development of nanotechnology and the equality and the equity in our countries.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to sending you off more information, which I'll be happy for you to share with others.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.